Good evening and welcome to episode 18 of the 2019 Vegan Hour on Tuesday, September the 17th. And tonight I'm doing a live cross to the UK to Dr. Andrew Knight, who I'm calling a vegan vet. Can I call you a vegan vet?
You certainly can. I've been called many worse things.
That's good. I love it. So as people are coming online, let's just do a big shout out to the sponsors of the Vegan Hour, which is Vegan Frothers, where you can get all your cruelty-free clothing and support animal charities at the same time, or animal sanctuaries at the same time, and also Cindian Natural Food Products, which are available Australia-wide and are all natural and GMO-free and soy-free and gluten-free and super tasty. So that's my sponsors for the Vegan Hour. Let's have a quick look at what's coming up this week in events before we get into tonight's show. So tomorrow night, if you're on the Gold Coast at Burleigh, head down to BKA Vegan Restaurant in Burleigh for their $12 bowl nights, where you're going to get the best food for only $12 per bowl, and you'll have a choice of things like curry bowls and Mexican bowls. Maybe they'll have moussaka. Whatever it is, it's all cruelty-free and it's all super delicious. Also, this Friday actually is the global climate strike. I guess you've got that happening over there too, Andrew, that global climate strike?
We do. I'm at the University of Winchester, and we really care about this sort of issues. Our Vice-Chancellor's just told us that the entire university staff can take 2 hours off to attend the protest that we're organising here in Winchester. So I look forward to joining that on university time with the blessing of our employer.
That's fantastic. That's great. Well, it's a very serious subject, and I'm sure it's something that we'll probably talk about tonight. So that's on here in different locations around Australia as well, I think from 12 o'clock on Friday. And also on Saturday, my Vegan Life group, if anyone can see it there, is having Vegan Luck in the Park locally, close to home. Actually, this one's going to be in Palm Beach at 12 o'clock, and you can bring along vegan food to share, meet lots of wonderful vegan people other than myself, and have a relaxing afternoon in the park. So if you missed the introduction, I have Dr. Andrew Knight from the UK, who has taken time out of his busy schedule to talk to us tonight about a broad range of subjects, one of which is something that I personally have a strong interest in, which is vegan diets for companion animals. And seeing as, Andrew, you have done a lot of research on this and you've done a lot of publications and all the rest, I thought it'd be great to get your input on this because I'm sure you know slightly more than I do. So before we get underway, can you tell our viewers a bit about yourself and your journey and how you became vegan and what sort of brought you up to today? So take it away.
Crikey, there's a lot in that question.
You might need more than an hour.
How I became vegan. When I was 23, I was trying to impress a certain young lady that I was dating about how ethical my lifestyle was, and so I decided to go vegan in the hope that would help. And 23 years later, we're still really good friends. We're still both vegan, and it was a very good choice. So that's how I became vegan. What I've done back around that time, I was helping to run the campaign against Australia's live sheep trade. Although I'm based in Winchester, 1 hour south of London, at a university today, I'm originally from Perth, and of course that's the world capital of the live sheep trade. So I spent a lot of time in the late 1990s helping to really get that campaign up and running. And I found it so inspiring, actually, to be doing something with my time that I felt was really significant and making a difference to large numbers, potentially millions of sentient creatures, that I thought, how do I set myself up so that I can get a career being involved in these sorts of issues with the ability to really make a difference? And so I thought about it strategically and thought, well, I should pick a profession where I'll be able to make a difference. And I thought, I could try to become a lawyer or an environmental scientist or a doctor or something. I decided to try to become a veterinarian. So I went back to school, studied really hard for a year, got into the veterinary course at West Australia's Murdoch University, completed the course, nearly didn't complete the course because I got sidetracked into a massive campaign about using humane alternatives to harming animals in the veterinary curriculum, which we succeeded in, but it took huge amounts of time. Yeah.
Is it correct that, yes, during the course you said, look, I don't want to sort of be involved in some of the animal experiments and that were involved in the course? Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's a whole other story, and it's a really interesting one. I worked with students at particularly University of Sydney and other Australian universities internationally. The upshot is that by 2005, we had successfully campaigned in a number of these universities, and students had then graduated from every Australian veterinary course without harming animals in their surgical training for the first time. And in nearly all cases, that involved a protracted campaign to overcome the entrenched positions of some of the faculty within the veterinary schools. In my particular case, I had to initiate legal action against the university, and we got mainstream media coverage, nationwide TV coverage at the time of what was going on at the university. So the amount of time that this took nearly resulted in me failing the veterinary degree, but I did manage to scrape through in the end. And I got my
when was this? How long ago was this?
I finished the veterinary course at Murdoch University at the end of 2001. Okay. And we set up the first formal policy at an Australian university whereby the university agreed to provide students with humane alternatives to harmful animal usage within their curricula. And that policy was considered quite groundbreaking, and it didn't just stop at animal usage. It addressed student conscientious objections. So we had students with certain religious beliefs that didn't want to or weren't able because of their religions to do things on holy days, and they had not been accommodated previously, and so they were accommodated. Things like that. So students with conscientiously held beliefs, the university agreed to make reasonable efforts to try to provide them with alternatives. And that was groundbreaking, and it was copied by other universities in Australia and internationally. We got rid of very invasive demonstration laboratories on sheep and other animals in physiology and other courses. We got rid of terminal surgical laboratories as well.
It was just, we'll just go back a step there. It was copied by other universities.
Yeah. And we managed to get rid of wholesale, very invasive experimentation on animals in the physiology.
So we're back.
Of course.
So in 2001, that was groundbreaking. What the point we were up to that I got clearly was that it was quite groundbreaking to be able for the university to be able to accept these changes, and then other universities took them on board.
Absolutely. So we also got rid of a lot of the invasive animal laboratories in the veterinary curriculum, and we introduced humane alternatives. So that was all fantastic, and that process has continued since then and is still going on today, actually. There's been a real sea change going on in the last couple of decades with respect to veterinary education across Australia, New Zealand, still going on. I literally today got a list of animal laboratories in the New Zealand veterinary curriculum with a request for comments about the potential for alternatives. So these campaigns are continuing today, also right across the US and various European countries. So I finished the veterinary degree and then went on to essentially work for animal advocacy organisations, starting to conduct studies into areas of invasive animal research and looking at the actual benefit that it provided to public health care and related topics. I ended up doing a PhD on that. I also was working in small animal veterinary practice in the UK at the time. Ended up becoming a veterinary specialist in animal welfare, and got recruited into academia in 2013. I went to the Caribbean and worked for one of the world's largest veterinary schools in the Caribbean for a couple of years, which was fantastic. I never expected I would end up there. I got out of the blue asked to apply for a position there because I knew a lot about models and mannequins for surgical training and clinical skills training. So I got asked to go and run the clinical skills laboratory at one of the world's largest veterinary schools. And that was fantastic. And then I had the opportunity to come to the University of Winchester, where I currently am, 1 hour south of London, and set up a new research centre for animal welfare. We run an undergraduate degree, which is doing very well, a master's degree, which I helped set up the undergrad degree, but I particularly set up and run the master's degree at the moment. And it's entirely distance learning, and it's a small factory producing highly skilled animal advocates. Actually, most of the students want to go on and have professional careers in animal advocacy. It's entirely distance learning. We have students as far away as Australia, New Zealand, South America, all around the world. And we cover the full range of animal welfare issues. We develop their ability to communicate them in publicly engaging modalities such as online blogs. They have to publish as part of their assignments, PowerPoint presentations, movies, but also the traditional academic essays as well. And they also emerge with a master's qualification in animal welfare science, ethics and law, which hopefully gives them the credentials to go out in society and be taken more seriously by important stakeholders. So I have the opportunity to do all of that now, which is fantastic. So now this is where I currently am at the University of Winchester, and we're literally starting semester next week for another academic year. And along the way, I've
it would be fair to say that you.
I was just going to say, along the way, I've looked into various issues such as plant-based versus meat-based diets for companion animals, and the contributions of animal agriculture to climate change, and a range of other important animal issues. They're the sorts of things I try to research and publish and present on nowadays.
And amazingly, I noticed that in amongst all of this, you still managed to actually fit in some like things like was it marathon running or something, and things like that? Was it?
I have a wonderful partner, Yasmin Debo. We got married recently, and she has a habit of
congratulations.
Thank you very much indeed. She has the habit of volunteering me for triathlons without my prior knowledge or consent.
I love how you put that.
Without my prior knowledge or consent. In case she's watching this. In case she's watching this, I just want to make it clear this is without my prior knowledge or consent. Anyway, so
that's brilliant.
Somehow I seem to. I'm doing a half marathon this coming weekend and one again 2 weeks later. The interesting thing about the UK is there's so much history here. So the one in 2.5 weeks is the Clarendon Marathon, and what we all have to do is we have to go to Salisbury, surviving any possible Russian nerve agents on the ground anywhere, because that's where the Russian dissidents were poisoned. So we have to start off in Salisbury, and then we have to follow, if we survive the nerve agents, we have to follow a Roman road, an actual Roman road, all the way to Winchester, which is where I currently am. And that's a marathon trail run, actually. And I did it for the first time last year. And so you get to do these interesting historical things in the UK. Where I am at the moment is the capital of the ancient kingdom of Wessex, which was the first one that managed to hold off the Viking invasions from the north, and eventually became England. So this used to be the capital where I am, and prior to that, there's a Bronze Age hill fort up on the hill, just just above Winchester. So there's a lot of history around, and we do get to run around all of it, actually.
Wow, that's quite impressive. It's I just don't know how you fit it all in. I'm really amazed.
Lack of choice is very helpful, and peer pressure. We also have a club here called Vegan Runners, which is now the biggest running club in the United Kingdom, and it's spread to other countries. We now have more than 3,000 people. The biggest
running club in the UK is
Vegan Runners.
Club.
Is Vegan Runners? Yep. We have matching green and black kit, which is very distinctive, and you very often see it at the mass races. The last meetup we had, there was something like 200 vegan runners turned up, and just basically took over a couple of races in Brighton, south of London. Vegan runners everywhere, so it's grown incredibly fast in the UK, and it's the biggest running club. I think partly because you don't need to live in a geographic location; you just need to be vegan. And we have our own competition league, and it's just huge. So when I began, there were about 50 of us.
Hasn't it
now there's 3,000. Yeah.
Wow. Hasn't it come an incredible way in the 26 years that you've been vegan?
It's amazing. I went to New Zealand and worked for one of the animal advocacy organisations recently for 1 year. I've been back in the UK for 1 year. When I came back, I went around some of the restaurants here in Winchester. Winchester is a very conservative, very old, slightly posh university town, like a miniature version of Oxford or something like that. And there's this lovely seafood restaurant that is in an ancient Tudor building. It looks beautiful, and I've always wanted to eat there, but it was a seafood restaurant, so I assumed there'd be nothing for me to eat as a vegan. So I walked down a footpath. I went in and I said, "Look, do you guys have any vegan options?" And they pulled out their entire vegan menu. So I said, "That's amazing, fantastic. Let's eat here." And for my next trick, I walked past that restaurant to the steakhouse, and I had a bunch of friends with me, and I said, "This will be funny, everyone. Stand here and watch this. This will be a laugh." So I went in and I said, "Do you have any vegan options?" And they pulled out their vegan menu, and I was.
What?
The joke was on me, because I thought it would be, "Oh, you've got nothing for us to eat. I'll go back outside. We'll have a laugh about it." But actually, they had vegan options, so I was forced then to sit and be polite and seriously consider it. And after doing that, I said, "Thanks very much. I'll go and check with my friends." So the laugh was on me then. So things have changed quite dramatically here in Winchester, and if they've changed here, then they've changed everywhere. Yeah. It's been an explosion of growth in plant-based diets in the UK and Europe and elsewhere, the US.
Oh, yes. Actually, before we get on to talking about the main topic that I want to talk about tonight, which is vegan diets for companion animals, I wanted to ask, so I'm assuming there's been a massive increase in the vegan products in the supermarkets and that over there as well, because I think the UK was always a step ahead of here in Australia in any case. There was a big vegetarian awareness from the 70s and the 80s and that with Paul McCartney, Linda McCartney, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. We've really seen the situation change in the UK and across Europe. I was talking to you before we went on air about the number of festivals. I think we're up to more than 100 vegetarian festivals happening each year in the UK now. And we have an organisation called, I think it's VegFest, which is setting them up all across Europe. We're getting thousands of people turning up to these events. I recently spoke at one in Berlin, and I had incredibly, for Australians, we think of Europe as often being cold and wet and rainy, but I was stuck in this tent in Berlin in the center of the city, and it was a white tent, and the temperature inside the tent was getting up to high 30s with humidity.
Wow. And
I had about 150 people in there fanning themselves with their handouts for my talk on plant-based companion animal diets, and all of them none of them left. They were all really keen to hear and to learn and be involved, and their level of interest is just phenomenal. I haven't seen this before. It was certainly the hottest talk I've ever given. It was, the sweat was running off me and everybody else, I think, but everyone toughed it out, and everyone enjoyed it. It was great. So there's been just a huge change in culture. I think it's going on at the moment, and we're all part of it. It's really exciting.
I mean, it is exciting, but it's also, as you and I and many vegans know only too well, it's also crucial now to be embracing the change towards a compassionate lifestyle because of all the information we're receiving about the climate crisis and the effect that the animal agriculture industry has had in making the climate crisis increase. So I think, and the fact that you just said there that you were sweating it out whilst giving this this talk, because you guys have been having some record temperatures over there. So
I mean, we're seeing the climate crisis, unfolding before our eyes. You're seeing with the fires in Australia. I worked recently in the Caribbean. We're seeing the increasingly devastating cyclones go through the Caribbean and literally just flatten some of those islands. I was, as I say, working at one of the world's largest veterinary schools in the Caribbean, 2013, 2014. We're part of a big organisation of 10 universities, and we had a sister medical school on another island. That other island got pretty much wiped out a couple of years ago. The medical school got flattened. Everything got flattened. So we're seeing these increasingly extreme climatic events, and we're also seeing the widespread, less extreme changes that we're all feeling. We had high 30s in the UK a few weeks ago. We had record-breaking temperatures across the UK. I think got to over 35 degrees in Cambridge, about 36 degrees, I think. Likewise, many European countries, and this is just the beginning, and we know it's just the beginning. It's going to go up and keep happening, unfortunately. Even if we stopped pumping out carbon dioxide right now, we know that temperatures will continue to climb for about another 20 years before they actually flatten off. What's exciting, though, is a change in awareness, I think. We have always received messages through the mainstream media and from the government about the importance of fossil fuel burning and transport, but we're now also seeing the message about the need to cut our consumption of animal products because it's recognised that these are actually a major source of greenhouse gases. So that wasn't there, I think, a couple of years ago, but now is very frequently, is usually part of the message these days in the United Kingdom, and I think that's a really exciting change. And on that note, by the way, if I could pick up on that, because what we haven't recognised very much until now is the contribution that plant-based and the contribution that pet food makes to this whole picture. But we're now starting to see studies. There's a study by Ocken in 2017 that came out in one of the world's top scientific journals, which is called PLOS One. And this study looked at the dogs and cats in America, in the US, and noted that 25 to 30% of the environmental impacts of animal agriculture are attributable to pet foods. So,
what was the percentage?
25 to 30% of the impacts, the environmental impacts of animal agriculture, are actually attributable to pet foods. So, pet foods is a big part of the impacts that are attributable to animal agriculture, but there's been very little attention given to pet foods to date. Really, there's been a lot more attention given to the need for people to transition to plant-based diets, but not much for pets until now, basically.
Now getting into this subject, you've got you've done quite a lot of research over quite a period of time into this area.
Absolutely. I've been very interested in this issue of plant-based diets for cats and dogs for a long time because I'm a small animal veterinarian. I worked in small animal veterinary practice. I'm plant-based myself. So soon after I began in practice, I started doing research into this area. And the first thing I did was went and searched the scientific literature for the evidence that vegan diets cause health problems for cats and dogs. and because this was a very common urban myth. And I couldn't find the studies to back this up, other than one single study I managed to find where a diet was formulated to be deficient in potassium, and it was a vegan diet. And this was fed to cats for a period of time. And at the end of that period of time, the cats developed signs of, wait for it, potassium deficiency. Amazing. Just incredible. All right. So that's the only.
They didn't get any funding for that study.
That's the only study that I could find. But accidentally, without trying, I found 10 studies showing that cats and dogs maintained on meat-based diets developed a whole range of health disorders. And that was without trying. And I've now found another one. So that's 11. So that's how I started with all of this, and I
can I just interrupt you there for a second, Andrew?
Yep.
A couple of questions came through there. Jana said, "Would you please link that study?" Which is something we can do after the live stream. And Kairos also said, "Could Andrew provide references for the research, please?" And it's an interesting discussion. So that's something that. Those studies, are they already linked through any of your websites that I can readily access?
Absolutely. Good. So my website on this is veggiepets.info. So that's VEGE pets.info. And there's short summaries there, and there are published summaries, but there's also detailed information provided via simple drop-down menus about meat-based diets for cats and for dogs and plant-based diets, and the abstracts of all of those studies and the citation details are in those sections. They're easy to find.
I've put that website up on the screen now, veggiepets.info. So anyone that wants to see that research, go to that website after the live stream, and you can find out more. So so your research was, you only found one study which was deficient in potassium that resulted in cats being deficient in potassium.
That's the one.
Down and 11 studies that were showing issues with the meat-based
animals
diet for dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And okay. I know there are more.
So where did you go from there?
I basically searched for all the information that I could find, and then put it into, organize it into hopefully easy to read, well organized pockets of information, and that's on the website veggiepets.info. I've stayed involved in this area since, and there was a study that came out in 2015 showing that some of the vegetarian brands in the US had been deficient in some amino acids. I think they looked at 24 plant-based diets for cats and dogs in the US and found that 1/4 of those were deficient in one or more amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. So that stimulated me to apply for a small research grant at the university, and I got a research assistant. We contacted all of those companies to request further information about their diets and their quality control processes and things like that. And we then added to that by digging up all the other relevant studies in this area, looking at the quality of plant-based diets for cats and dogs, and also of meat-based diets as well. And we published all of that in a scientific article, which was published in 2016, which to date is the most detailed sort of review of the health and nutritional evidence relating to plant-based and meat-based diets for cats and dogs. And that's been very successful. It's been downloaded more than 33,000 times, and it's the #1 article for the journal Animals, which is kind of the leading open access journal in the animal welfare field at the moment. So,
and where can people find that link to that study? Is that off in VeggiePets?
Yes,
website?
Indeed. There should be a link to it from the website. Yeah.
Okay.
So there is a section on the website. I'm just bringing it up now so I can make sure I give the right information. But it's basically published overviews. If you click the diets information, then there'll be published overviews, and underneath that you can actually find this.
Vegetarian, Published overviews, yep. Okay.
There is a 2016 article in the journal Animals, and that is the one that has been downloaded so much. I've also published a series of YouTube videos on this issue as well, which I've been asked to produce. So yeah, I think the success of this article is, nothing to do with brilliance of those of us who've been involved, but rather just the topic is so interesting to so many people, and I know you've seen that in some of the interest that you've received when you've looked into this topic yourself, and we've seen the same interest attracted whenever this issue has been raised in the UK, the US, or other regions as well. You get hundreds of comments, you get widespread splits of opinion for and against. And I think it's very understandable that people initially think, well, cats are not rabbits. They're not evolved to eat sort of plants. Surely they can't possibly be healthy on plant-based diets. So it's an understandable perspective for people to have initially. But when you look into the issue a bit deeper, you start to discover some obvious truths, which is that cats, dogs, and all other species have requirements for specific sets of nutrients, but not specific sets of ingredients. And nutrients and ingredients are not the same thing. There's no sort of scientific or biological requirement for cats or dogs to need any particular ingredient, whether it be meat or anything else. What they do need is the right set of nutrients. They need them for the right species, for the life stage, whether they're very young, very old, adult, pregnant, lactating. They need the nutrients to be supplied in a formulation which is adequately palatable so that they're willing to eat the substance and that they find it enjoyable. So it's got to taste okay, have the right smell. Sense of smell is really important to cats and dogs. The right texture, colour. It's got to be adequately bioavailable, so mostly digestible and absorbable into the cells of the body. And then the full range of nutrients that the animals needs to be there. And obviously all the species have different nutrient profiles that they need. And providing you supply all of these things there's no reason why an animal should not do well. And indeed, the indications are that if you supply all of these things, but you don't include the dietary hazards, which are so common in the commercial meat-based diets, the animals may in fact have better health. They certainly have health which is likely to be as good and possibly better. There are many anecdotal reports and individual cases in which various health benefits are described, and that's interesting. What's even more important is controlled scientific studies of populations, and there have been a couple of those as well, also showing health which is just as good as the meat-based population.
There's a question I've got there from Joe, but Joe, I'll get to your question in a moment. Sorry, Andrew. I wanted to ask you. You said a minute ago about the issues with some of the issues with the meat-based diet. I just wanted to get you to expand on what some of the complications that might arise from that.
Well, I mean, we are feeding our cats and dogs on diets which are very unnatural. They are full of ingredients such as body parts from animals such as cows, pigs, fish, animals that they would not naturally eat. To which we add a whole range of dietary hazards. So we add the body parts from animals that are slaughtered for human consumption, but which are not fit to be consumed by humans. Those from animals that arrived at the slaughterhouse that are diseased, disabled, dying, or dead on arrival. So those are the 4Ds.
Yeah. 4Ds, I've heard of that.
4Ds, yeah, and they can't be used for the human food chain. Body parts such as the tendons, the ligaments, the sinews, gristle, diseased tissue, cancerous tissue, it all ends up in the pet food chain, or a lot of it does anyway, in order to extract a little bit more commercial value from this produce, essentially. We have things like supermarket rejects that are past their use-by date, meat which is past its use-by date. being recycled into the pet food chain, not always with the plastic packaging removed because that increases labour costs. We have chemical preservatives. Some of those are more dangerous than others. There are a bunch that have been banned in European countries because they cause birth defects and other health hazards, but which are still used in diets imported from the US. There may be antibiotic residues. Antibiotics are routinely given to intensively farmed animals. They need to be withheld for a certain period of time prior to the animals going to the human food chain, but not into pet food. Now, usually it's the byproducts of animals being slaughtered for human consumption that go into the pet food chain, but not always. When the more premium pet food the brands are, the more likely they are to have good quality body parts from animals that have been slaughtered just for the pet food chain. So the quality of those ingredients is likely to be higher, but then we're getting into bigger problems in terms of more of a direct impact on animal welfare, the farm animal welfare, the environment, ethics and things like that. There's all sorts of things. There's restaurant grease from fast food restaurants when they deep fry products where that oil builds up carbonated waste products, free radicals, trans fatty acids, all of which are health hazards. That is reused and then scraped off the hot plates into 44-gallon drums and sold on as fat blenders to be added into some of these diets. By adding these sorts of fats, it increases the palatability of the diets. If you cut open a packet of dry dog kibble, for example, the distinctive smell wafts off the kibble, which is attractive to dogs and cats, and that will be from spraying on of these fatty oils, for example. So there's all sorts of hazards that actually go into these meat-based diets. So we're starting off feeding a whole bunch of body parts from animals that they would never naturally eat, and then we're adding artificial hazards at low levels, and we're asking our dogs and cats to actually eat these things, to take them into their bodies, twice a day, often for life. And if you subject the cells of the body to low levels of potentially unsafe ingredients, twice a day for life, you are likely to, I think, to start to see adverse effects. And as veterinarians in practice, we do see increasing rates of problems such as cancer, such as obesity from simply overnutrition, such as heart disease, liver disease, kidney disease. And, we think, well, we're not really sure why this is happening. Maybe it's just because the pets are living longer, but it's common sense. It's common sense to me that if you subject the cells of the body to dietary hazards twice a day for life, you may eventually start to see some changes. Changes can predispose to cellular mutation. That can predispose to cancer. We see the same thing, unfortunately, with people. When people are smoking, we know that the lining of the throat starts to change, and that can result in mutation. That can then lead to cancer. So it's a similar process going on. Yeah.
I want to get to Joe's question, but she's got two questions now. But I want to ask you one more thing on this topic before we get to Joe's question, which is that I've noticed over a period of time that it seems like when dogs get to a certain age, like maybe say over 10 years of age, that they tend to get arthritic conditions in their hind legs, and I'll see them out walking around in the parks or whatever, and their rear legs are starting to get stiff, and they've got a lot of life still left in the rest of them by the looks of it. And I look at that and I think, is this not a sign that their diet is not particularly good for them because they're getting arthritic conditions at a relatively early age? Is that something that you've noticed, or is that just my imagination?
No, I think it is something that we do commonly see in veterinary practice, and some breeds are more predisposed than others. There's also degeneration of the nerves to the hind legs that can occur with age in some breeds. German Shepherd dogs, for example, are well known to have quite a lot of this, and I've seen a lot of it myself in veterinary practice. As with older people, and I guess I'm starting to class myself in this group. I think it's important to
You're too
regularly.
young to be old.
I'm a lot older than you might think. I'm just vegan. That's all. But it's important to continue to exercise at low levels and keep everything loosened up to avoid things stiffening up too much, to gradually transition into exercise. If you take an old dog for a long run and it's not used to doing that, of course you're going to see problems. Exactly the same thing has happened to me on occasions in the past, and I'm not even a dog. Regarding arthritis, it's very important to keep the body weight a little bit on the slim side for dogs. The majority of dogs and cats are becoming overweight now, which is probably one of the top health concerns in cats and dogs. And that's a definite problem that has been getting worse and is part of this whole picture of the adverse effects of pet foods on the environment, for example. Yes, they're being overfed and under-exercised, but particularly overfed. So decreasing body weight will decrease arthritis. There are dietary supplements that can be added, such as essential fatty acids. And it is conceivably possible that dietary hazards over a long period of time, such as free radicals, could result in, I suppose, damage to cartilage in the joints. I think the main causes would simply be age, and the ways to deal with that would be regular exercise at levels that are not damaging, and keeping a fairly slim body weight. That certainly would be the way to go. Reduction in obesity is one of the benefits associated with plant-based diets for cats and dogs, one of the most common benefits that is reported. So it can help with their mobility as well.
Now, I must get to Joe's comments because, sorry, Joe, I hope you're still watching. Because I'm sorry, we really got into some very important information there. Joe asks first, there are limited commercial diets available for dogs and cats. The only one I'm aware of in the UK is Benevo, which interestingly is my cat's favourite one because we can now get it in Australia, but that's anyway, that's beside the point. This food has always concerned me because it claims to be for both dogs and cats, yet the two species have very different nutritional needs. What is your view of this? That's the first part of the question. And the second part is, or do you recommend homemade diets, as my experience of these is still very difficult to attain the appropriate nutrient profile? And Joe is still watching. Thank you, Joe. Okay.
Okay.
So did you get all that?
Yeah. Regarding limited options, the good news is that I've been contacted by about 4 companies in the last year that are wanting to create new plant-based diets for cats and dogs. This is an area that is growing and is going to grow massively because simply the amount of money to be made in the plant-based meats sector, the meat substitutes sector for humans, but also for pet food. The pet food market is worth billions, and companies that want to make money are recognizing the potential money to be made by getting into this space. Anyway, so I provide a list of suppliers on my website, veggiepets.info, of the companies that I know that are supplying these diets. It's not up to date. I haven't had time to do it. I'd love to get a research grant so that I can really get into this area and do that kind of thing. But it's not up to date, but it is there and it may be helpful. If anyone knows of any other sources, please send them in to me and I'll add them. It does raise a concern if companies
it needed it.
Great, thank you. If companies are marketing products purportedly for both cats and dogs, it does raise the obvious concern that the nutrient profiles of the two are not the same, and how could a diet meet both of their needs? Well, I suppose it could meet both of their needs if you simply ensured that all the nutrients for cats and dogs were present in the minimum quantities needed for the species. The trouble is that you'd be providing extra nutrients and excessive amounts for some of those species. So Commercially, that would be questionable because the company would be spending money supplying those when they're not needed. From a health perspective, usually oversupply of a nutrient is not a problem, other than the epidemic of obesity, which is happening in cats and dogs. But there are situations where oversupply could be a problem for certain nutrients. So I would certainly talk to a company and say, cats and dogs don't have the same nutrient profiles, obviously. How do they address concerns about excessive nutrients for one of those species if they're trying to supply a product like this? Perhaps look for products which are formulated just for cats or just for dogs, because that would be less likely to have these problems. Regarding homemade diets,
it's interesting that Joe mentions Benevo, because Benevo recently became available in Australia. So my cat got the chance to try it for the first time a few months ago.
Okay,
and she took to it like a duck to water. She loved it. She loved it even more than the vegan pet locally produced in Victoria, the vegan pet brand that she had been eating for the last 2 years. She loved it so much. And it does say here, the one we get here, it's Benevo for cats. There is one for dogs and one for cats. So Joe, if you're still watching, as far as I'm aware, there are two different versions, but I haven't checked to see if the ingredients are the same, but because I haven't looked at the dog version. So, but I've got to say, so far, my cat and a few other vegan cats that I know of in Australia that have tried Benevo have loved it. So
fantastic. I understand it's reasonably tasty. There was yet another one of these sort of mainstream media stories about yet another company starting up in this area. Just a couple of days ago, there was a video on Facebook of one of the CEOs of these companies actually munching away at a bunch of the product himself, just to demonstrate that this is of such high quality that it can be consumed by people. And he challenged the CEOs of the competitor companies to also eat their own product, and he said he was pretty sure he was the only CEO that was willing to do that. And fair point.
Well, as funny as it sounds, the vegan pet here in Australia is human grade, and supposedly is, if you're really desperate and there's not a good vegan restaurant open, you can eat it.
Well, that's good to know. There you go. Yet another benefit of these wonderful diets for cats and dogs. There was a question about homemade diets, and homemade diets are cheaper than buying the complete diets, but it requires a lot of time and hassle to make your own kibble and bake it in the oven. I've done it myself. I'm not a great cook at the best of times, and this was quite labour intensive and time consuming. You do need to add in a supplement from one of the companies to try to ensure that the homemade diet has all the nutrients that your cat or dog needs. And if you don't do that, then the diet will be deficient, and eventually, not the next day or week, but eventually there'll be nutritional deficiencies arising. It's better, I think, to buy a commercial complete diet.
Yes, in the UK, do you have supplements being made there, or do you have to get yours from the US like we do here?
This is such a rapidly changing space. I'm not sure what the current situation is. There are so many new products and companies coming onto the market. The traditional supplier has been the US. Maybe they still need to be imported. I don't know. Again, I'm still trying to get a research grant to get involved in this area more, and I haven't yet managed to do that. So I haven't had the chance to look into that in detail yet, unfortunately. Yeah, but buying a complete diet gives some reassurance that it's more likely to be nutritionally sound, although it does depend on the quality control that goes into the production of the diet. And the same concerns apply to meat-based diets as well. They also have quality control problems and are not necessarily nutritionally sound either. So as with buying things in general, if it's produced to a higher standard, you pay more money for it, it's more likely to be a good quality product.
So somebody watching this tonight, John just made a funny comment just as a sideline there. He says, your pet won't like it if you steal its food. But if somebody watching this tonight is inspired to I'm sure my cat won't like it. In fact, my cat actually is sitting behind me. You can't see her, but she's asleep on the seat behind me. So she's the world's most gorgeous vegan cat. But anyway, I wanted to, because we're going to have to start. We've got about 5 minutes left in the vegan hour. I wanted to ask, what if somebody's inspired to look at feeding their dog or cat a plant-based diet? What should they look out for? What are some of the important things to be aware of? What are some of the important things to be aware of?
I would try a gradual transition onto the new diet to give the digestive enzymes a chance to transition and give the microorganisms in the intestines a chance to transition. If you do a gradual change, you're less likely to have adverse reactions such as diarrhea. So some dogs will just eat first and ask questions later. They'll wolf down their food and they won't require any encouragement. Some other animals, particularly old fussy cats that have been on a specific brand of meat-based food for many years, will be very hard to change. I think all of them can be successfully transitioned with gradual changes, patience and persistence, and some tricks. And I list those on my website, veggiepets.info. Things like supplying fresh food, smelly food, warm food, dietary additives that can make it all more tasty. It's important to act by your behaviour. Give a message that nothing untoward is occurring. You think that the food is just the same as the food that the animal's always been fed. If you behave suspiciously, your animal may get the message that something strange might be going on. So try to pretend nothing unusual is occurring. Secondly, in order to safeguard the health of your animals, two things are important. One is to try to make sure the diet is nutritionally sound. As I mentioned, if it's not, then you won't see a problem the next day or the next week, but eventually you will. So using a commercial diet that is nutritionally complete for the animal concerned, going for companies that seem to have better quality products, I encourage people to ask the companies, what steps do they take to make sure the diet is actually nutritionally complete. The gold standard would be to send it to an independent laboratory for confirmation that it meets all the nutritional requirements that it should. And very few companies do this yet. I've just heard the report of one company that's actually done that, and that's the first I've heard of recently. So I think if people ask the companies, what steps do they take? Do they work with veterinary nutritionists? Do they have good quality control procedures in-house? If you ask two companies and one of them gives you no information and the other says, oh yes, we do A, B and C, then that helps you make a choice. So that's one thing to do. The other thing, apart from trying to ensure nutritional soundness, the other thing would be actually pay attention, if you can, to the urinary acidity. Because when pets go on to plant-based diets, the urine can become a little bit more alkaline, and this can cause mineral crystals to start to crystallize out of the urine and form tiny stones and bigger stones and even block up the urinary tract. And if that does occur, it's very serious. It's the biggest problem in male cats because they've got the smallest urinary tract. But I advise everybody, males and females, cats and dogs, to actually try to collect a urine sample once a month. You can shove a foil baking tray underneath a dog when it goes to urinate. For cats, you can use little white plastic beads, which are non-absorbent, kitty litter plastic beads you can get from a vet. You may need to use these at some other point. If the cat's got a medical problem, the vet asks for urine samples, so it's good to know how to do this anyway. You collect a urine sample about once a month and then just check the acidity, find out what it is normally, and you'll notice if there are any changes occurring. So there you can
actually, I don't know if anyone's going to see this, but you can actually Can you see that? Yeah, there's
this is
step.
a litmus test strip. So these are paper strips that you pop into the urine, which Harry's
test strip. Yeah.
Brilliantly demonstrating there. Perfect. You can get those from veterinarians. They're fabulous. Even better is an electric pH meter, which you could try that as well. You can get them for fish tanks, for example. Some way of checking the urine acidity once a month under normal circumstances. And if there's anything weird going on, i.e. you're changing the diet, you're seeing any blood in the urine or any difficulty passing urine, do it once a week or immediately. Get a urine sample, just check the acidity. If it is starting to become more alkaline than it should be, you can add in a range of things into the diet to increase the acidity, and they can produce changes which are mild, moderate, or strong, depending on what you add. So the normal acidity of the urine is about 6 to 7.5, where 7 is neutral and 6 is acidic for cats and dogs. 6 to 7.5 is normal, 7 is neutral, 6 is acidic. So this is on my website, veggiepets.info, along with the advice of actually what to try to add into the diet if you need to try to increase the urine acidity. It sounds a little bit complicated, but it's potentially an important issue, especially for male cats. But for safety's sake, I would advise checking cats and dogs, male and female, once a month. Just get into the habit. People talk about checking the oil in your motor car once a month. Try to just make it part of the routine. And once you learn how to do it, it's something that shouldn't be difficult to actually do. And I do advise that people try to check this as well. So those two things, making sure the diet's nutritionally sound, keeping an eye upon the urine acidity, and anything weird going on with urination, difficulty passing urine, blood in the urine, those would be danger signs. On the plus side, don't forget that your diet will lack all of the hazards which are so common in the commercial meat-based diets, and you're likely to see potentially a range of health benefits if you make this change.
Yes. Yes. Well said. And I mean, we could talk probably for a lot longer on this subject, but we've covered, a lot of the important information that I wanted to cover. And it's been, I've got to start winding up now. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear from you, to just get the information direct from the man himself, who's done so much research on it, because I've been reading your stuff for the last year or two, and so it's really great to actually hear it from the horse's mouth. Sorry.
Thanks very much. I have been called many things, but not previously a horse. But there you go. It's very nice to hear an Australian accent. We don't hear too many of them in this part of the world, so it's good to have been on the show. Thank you.
You were once one of us, Andrew. So
I still am. I still am. I'm not giving that up.
So Linda says it was a fascinating and helpful talk. Thank you both so much. And Jana says thank you. And this tonight's episode will be on YouTube within a day, hopefully, if I can figure out how to get this format onto YouTube. But anyway, before we wind up, so I'll just mention in 2 weeks' time, when I'm back for episode 19, back in the studio, I will have vegan vlogger Amanda Ducks with me. So join us on Tuesday, October the 1st for that. And I want to thank you once again, Andrew, for finding time in your busy day to talk to us. Thank you very much. And if people have anyone that's been watching this now or later, if you have any questions, I'll link the actual website, veggiepets.info, into the comments section, so that you can just go there and get a lot of information that we've talked about tonight. So I'll wind it up now. Thank you very much again, Andrew. And to all our viewers, remember to live vegan and save lives. And I'll be back in 2 weeks.